Hi there, welcome to this first ever episode of the limited series podcast, Queer AuDHD BIPOC. Before we start, I just want to let you know this podcast and the book that it's also a part of are all based on lived experiences, community stories, and research. It's here to help you feel seen, understood, and maybe even find new ways of caring for yourself and working towards collective liberation. But just so we're clear, I'm not a doctor, therapist, or clinician, and this podcast is not medical advice. It shouldn't be used to diagnose yourself or anyone else. If you're wondering about getting an official diagnosis or medical support, please reach out to a qualified healthcare provider you trust. And with that, let's get started. So, welcome to the first episode of Queer AuDHD BIPOC. My name is TQ. I use they, them pronouns. I am a physically disabled, queer, trans, AuDHD, Chinese Singaporean, squishy human being. I am working on a book called Queer exclamation mark, AuDHD exclamation mark, BIPOC exclamation mark. And this podcast is also part of that book. And in today's episode, I just want to give a quick introduction to this project so you know what to expect. And for early supporters, stay tuned to the end for your bonus material where we will be talking about internalized messages of oppression and noticing how they manifest in our bodies and starting the process of dismantling internalized oppression within ourselves. I also want to shout out the early supporters of Queer AuDHD BIPOC. These generous supporters have been with us from day one, and their names are Ima, Brian, Rach, and Bobby. So if you'd like to get a shout out of your own, both on the podcast and in the book, you can go to rewilding.cc/book to become an early supporter and get your name shouted out in the next episode. All right, so let's begin. I created this podcast because I find it really difficult as someone who is not a social media user to find content by other Black, Indigenous, and people of color about being both autistic and ADHD. And yes, ADHD is a thing. Until 2013, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, also known as the DSM, indicated that autism and ADHD can't be diagnosed in the same person. And all that changed with the release of the DSM-5. So if you ask me, what is ADHD in short, and this is not an official definition, it's just the one that I've created for myself. It's when a person is both autistic and ADHD in ways that can make daily life, communication, relationships, and work more overwhelming, especially due to the ways in which our environments, society, and systems are shaped. But at the same time, being AuDHD can also come with incredible strengths like intense focus, directness, creativity, and divergent ways of thinking. I'm sorry, I'm using my iPhone as a camera. I keep forgetting the camera's up here, so I'll try to look at you and not at the camera on my computer. All right, so I basically struggled to find content by other people out there who are like me. There's a lot of white male content creators talking about autism and AuDHD out there, and I'm sure they have great things to say. But it's very hard to see myself in those narratives because there are so many lived experiences that are not shared. And specifically, I was looking at I just wanted to be able to relate to other adult AuDHDers of color, many of whom are also queer. And I know this from my own friend circle and my own community that a lot of us are queer and autistic and people of color, or queer ADHD people of color, or queer ADHDers people of color. Like, I know we exist, but the algorithm, whether it's the search engine or social media, it's never neutral, right? Think about the systems of power that feed into pushing certain pieces of content towards the top, right? Think about cognitive biases that cause content by white ADHDers to trend, whereas content by people of color might not get the same kind of visibility in an algorithm. And I was just looking for stories about what it's like to be multiply marginalized as queer, as neurodivergent, because I'm not just autistic and ADHD. I have dyscalculia. Yeah, I was looking for stories on the multiple layers of being neurodivergent and often having to hide that in many community spaces or in society, in the public, at work, in school, while also being queer and trans in a world where it's not safe to be that in many places and most of the time. And then also navigating racism, microaggressions, and then layer on all of the other experiences, especially when you are AuDHD, other co-occurring conditions like having hypermobile syndrome, having gastrointestinal tract issues, having chronic illness, layering all of that, and you can feel you're a lot for the world to handle. And I know that's not true. That's just us existing as we are in a world that was never set up for us to exist or thrive, right? So that was the specific content I was looking for out there. And I know there are some amazing content creators out there. I myself find social media very physically helping to use. But in the moments when I really am looking for that kind of connection, when, I don't get to see my friends, that's where I go. And I'm happy to say that I've invited some of these content creators to share their stories on this podcast, and you'll see who they are in the coming weeks. But basically, I wanted to create this sort of living archive for people like me who are search engine users, not social media users. And if they type ADHD BIPOC or queer ADHD BIPOC, I'm hoping that all the content that we're going to put together for you will show up in your search engine so that this resource can be found easily and help you feel supported, feel validated, help you feel less alone. All right. So let's see. This podcast is basically for everyone who lives in multiple margins, right? Racialized people, Black, Indigenous people of color, people of the global majority who are also disabled and or mentally ill and or chronically ill. It's me, who are ADHD, queer, trans, LGBTQIA+, living in diaspora, which is also me, living as an immigrant, also me. It's so much more than just the title of the podcast, Queer ADHD BIPOC. A lot of the people I'm inviting live at so many margins that I want to be able to talk about, right? I am tired of filtering the ADHD experience through a dominant narrative that is usually white, cis, heterosexual, able-bodied, or non-physically disabled. I want, the way society is set up assumes that there is a default, which is whiteness, and then we're all deviations of that. I'm throwing that out altogether, and I want to embrace us at all of the layers in which we experience the world, in which we are oppressed. This book and podcast is also for anyone who wants to better support us, families, partners, friends, healthcare providers, anyone who's part of the education system, employers, HR professionals, policymakers, and anyone with the power and privilege to create real systemic change for queer ADHD BIPOC folks around the world. We're already underrepresented. We're not waiting for institutions to give us permission to speak up. We don't need more authority figures to tell us what we are and aren't, especially through the lens of pathology. We know that we're the experts on our lived experience. So for anyone who wants to stand with us, I hope that you'll listen to us and support the work that we do. All right. So many of us spent years, even decades, without understanding our neurodivergent needs and the systemic barriers that we face to meeting those needs. And now we are playing catch up in systems that weren't built for us. So this podcast and the book that I'm writing, co-writing, validates these struggles and offers community-based ways for us to understand ourselves even when the systems push us out. It's my way of saying we exist, we matter, and our needs are real. So if you're queer, late identified, or late diagnosed ADHD and BIPOC, I want to help you feel seen, less alone, and embraced, which is basically what I wanted when I first started realizing and getting help for being ADHD. I want to validate how being ADHD interacts with all the other aspects of our existence, especially when it doesn't look like the mainstream ADHD narrative. I want to center our humanity and our inherent worth, while at the same time, celebrating our strengths and acknowledging the real systemic challenges that we face in this world that's not built for people like us. I hope that you'll find some clarity and some light at the end of a lifelong tunnel of confusion, self-doubt, and shame. especially shame that never belonged to us because, I've been there. I'm still working through all of and it's an opportunity. This whole project is an opportunity to center the people I regard to be the real experts on the layers of our lived experience. Queer, Black, Brown, Indigenous, Asian, Pacific Islander, Middle Eastern, and other racialized AuDHD. I want to uplift our wisdom, our experience, and expertise that's often devalued by racist, colonial scientific standards. Science is important and it's going to be a huge backbone in this project, but we also need to acknowledge it's not politically neutral. I want to celebrate AuDHD joy. I want to show there's no monolithic way of being AuDHD because there are 8 billion different brains and bodies on this planet. And for me, that means there's 8 billion different neurotypes and no two AuDHDers are the same. Same with gender, same with ways of loving each other. And it's not even counting, all of the neurotypes and genders of the ancestors who came before us and folks who will be here long after we're gone. All right. And I wasn't going to wait around to see if a publisher will give this project a shot. I wasn't going to wait for institutional validation to make this project happen. So this project is grassroots, crowdfunded, collectively, not self-published, especially the book. Especially if you're going to join us and be an early supporter, you'll be doing so much good, and I'll explain more in the moment. This is also a micro experiment in alternative economies where neurodivergent BIPOC support other neurodivergent BIPOC, especially since so many of us have been shut out of traditional workplaces. Everyone who was a part of this project was paid for their time and labor. And finally, I was frustrated with how much content out there on neurodivergence and AuDHD is focused on self-help and the individual and self-care, which are important. But I don't see the world that way. I see all of the interconnecting systems that have blocked our access to our well-being, healthcare, community, income, and safety. And we need to talk about them. It is difficult to talk about. I am sure I will screw up at some point, and I welcome your feedback at any point. For this project, you can contact me at my website. But we need to talk about those systems because they're real and they exist. And without this bigger picture, many of us have just internalized layer upon layer of internalized racism, internalized ableism, internalized capitalism, internalized cis heterosexism, and more onto our bodies and our minds. We've taken on the failings of these oppressive systems that were never built for us to thrive. And then we turn them into personal failings, and it breaks my heart. So I hope that putting all of these things, all of the challenges and struggles that we face in context will help us visualize these oppressive systems that we've been trained not to see and start dismantling them and building the world that we can thrive in. And of course, on a personal level, so that you can shed the weight of the shame that was never yours to carry. And that is also what my early supporters, we're gonna work on in the bonus material after the end of this episode. I have created a little bonus episode called Whose Voice Is It? And it's basically an episode that helps us to start verbalizing and noticing those internalized layers of oppression and start incorporating little micro practices to notice and shed those layers of internalized capitalism, ableism, and more. And I believe it's so important to start there because if we don't work on that and dismantle that within ourselves, how are we going to go out there and dismantle it in our communities, in our societies, in our countries? How are we going to make sure that we don't reenact ableist, capitalist dynamics in our relationships with others, in the workplace, in community, with our children? It all starts with us. So that's what that bonus episode is for. And so if you're listening to this, you're listening to it 1 week after the early supporters have received this episode. So why am I inviting you to be an early supporter of the project? So everyone who is an early supporter and pre-orders a copy of the book, the ebook, which will also come with an audiobook, you'll be helping to fund this project and making sure that we create it at the highest possible quality. For example, early supporters have helped me get a new microphone and have already helped to cover the expenses for the first 2 interviewees I'm bringing onto the show. So that's where the money goes. Our goal right now is about $1,300, and it's going towards interviews. It's going towards equipment, although I I don't need any more equipment, so that one is done. Yay, we hit milestones. So interviews, equipment, and ADHD-friendly software for video editing because I really suck at video editing. That one is a really important one. And most importantly, I'm also hiring another queer AuDHD person of color to fact check the book and make sure that we're not spreading misinformation because misinformation is rampant. And yeah, if you pre-order and support this project, that's where the funds go to first to make sure that we create the best possible resource for other queer AuDHD BIPOC out there, the best possible book, the best possible podcast. Once all of those expenses are covered, the remaining will go towards possibly printing a physical copy of the book if there's enough demand for that. But most importantly, funds will go equally to the Autistic People of Color Mutual Aid Fund and to my disabled Palestinian friend, Nara. She has multiple sclerosis and cancer and epilepsy. She is raising 2 young children with her husband in occupied Gaza that's facing genocide right now. And when you support the project, your funds are also going towards a disabled Palestinian family who is surviving genocide. Okay? So that's what I have for you so far. This is the introductory episode. Thank you for listening till the end. Where can you go to support the project? The link is in the show notes. You can also go to rewilding.cc/book. That's rewilding.cc/book. So that's where you can become an early supporter. There is a sliding scale available. You can explore all of the different perks that come with an early supporter. You get bonus episodes, behind the scenes updates, early previews of chapters. You get shout outs on the podcast and in the book, lots of perks that's just reserved for you in your private member portal. Okay, so that's rewilding.cc/book is where you can get all of this great stuff. All right, so thank you for listening to the first ever episode of Queer AuDHD BIPOC. And for my early supporters, please stay on for your bonus episode. Whose voice is that? Releasing internalized voices of oppression. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next week.